The Hubitat Smart Home Hub just gained compatibility with Apple HomeKit and their voice assistant Siri. You can control anything in your Hubitat hub with the Home app, with your HomePod Mini, and more. What's amazing about this connection is that just about everything is being done locally, and that means it's pretty lightning fast. With the comprehensive and complex automations you can create with Hubitat being combined with the best of Apple, this might give you a reason to start using either Hubitat or HomeKit in your home. So let me show you how we can set this up in minutes and how to do some incredible things with this system. Hello Automators, thanks for tuning in again. I'm Brian from Automate Your Life, and the folks over at Hubitat announced this on a live stream very recently. To understand why this is so impactful, you have to understand that one of the most difficult things with Apple HomeKit is to build a smart home without spending a ton of money. And one of the best ways to keep costs down as you build out your smart home is to buy cheaper Zigbee or Z-Wave devices from makers like IKEA, Third Reality, and Zeus. However, those options for Apple HomeKit users have been few and far in between, and in many cases people use what's called a home bridge, which becomes an extra piece of hardware. Now, Hubitat's hub itself is an extra piece of hardware, but it is incredible in a few ways that puts its heads and tails above any other hub that you can simply buy and plug in today. Now, I've already told you that the automations run locally, but these automations are some of the most powerful available today. The Rule Machine from Hubitat can accomplish just about anything you can dream up. Now, Hubitat has a large library of Zigbee and Z-Wave products, and it continues to develop new relationships to expand that library. Hubitat has a full smart home security system, and it can work with things like Sharp tools to create dashboards that are much better than the Apple Home app. And on the flip side, Hubitat has struggled with cameras. However, this is an area that HomeKit does really well in, and one could argue that HomeKit Secure video is the best way to deal with smart home cameras today. And because of the flexibility of Hubitat, I'm going to be able to show you not only how to get this set up in minutes, but I'm also going to be able to show you how to get around any of the issues you will experience in managing this system within today's video. It's a match made in heaven, and it truly has me looking at whether or not I want to shift to using Hubitat and HomeKit in my own home. The setup process begins by making sure that you at least have this version of Hubitat's firmware loaded onto your hub. It's easy to find this in the settings for your hub, and then you can find the update checker in those same settings. My hub went through that update process, but when I went to the apps section in Hubitat, I couldn't find the HomeKit integration app, and that's how you begin the process of integrating these two systems. So what I did is I rebooted my hub, and then I waited about 10 minutes and the application showed up in the list. Now, before I hit the install button, I checked my list of devices, and I was worried about duplicate devices showing up in the Home app on my iPad, but today my Philips Hue lighting and my Casa or TP-Link products, as well as any other Wi-Fi or platform integration that I've done in the past, did not have an option to be used with Apple HomeKit. I actually think this is really smart because it avoids you having those duplicate devices in HomeKit for things like Hue, which already integrates with HomeKit. But what about something like TP-Link that doesn't have full HomeKit compatibility today? Don't worry, I have a solution for you for controlling those coming later in the video. Even if those integrations become available in the future, it'll be okay for duplicate devices because as you start the HomeKit integration app inside of Hubitat, you get to pick and choose which devices you would like to bring over to HomeKit. And no, you can't have devices coming from HomeKit into Hubitat. That's not how this game works, but I'm going to show you how you can work around this and control HomeKit only items from Hubitat and vice versa. Now, once I chose all my devices, you'll notice I'm putting in multiple sensors, some plugs, and a bulb. Many of those sensors have multiple sensors on them, so I was just hoping those would all show up. So then I scrolled down to the bottom of the configuration page and I found my Apple HomeKit QR code that had just been generated and the HomeKit number that you can use to input into the Apple Home app. So in the Apple Home app, I added an accessory. I put in that HomeKit code and it found my hub right away. Sometimes, depending on your network configuration, hubs connected to an Ethernet cable can be a struggle to find in this process. So if you're getting a response from HomeKit that the accessory is not found, here are a couple steps that you can take. Check to make sure that the device is actually on the network. That's your hub. Then you can do this by heading to findmyhub.hubitat.com. If it's not immediately found by that part of the application, it's not likely to be found by your Apple Home app. Number two, you can have an Apple Home hub clearly defined in the Home app. This helps more later as it helps automations run locally, but see which one of Apple's products is your Home hub by going into the Apple Home app, going into Home Settings, and then Home Hubs and Bridges. Here, whatever says connected is acting as your Apple Home Hub. You can pick if you have multiple HomePod minis, and if you have the Apple TV, you can go into the Users and Accounts section of the settings, find Home Hub at the bottom, and choose to disconnect it as the Home Hub or connect it if you haven't already. Some of these Home Hubs might work better than others for this initial pairing process, but either an Apple TV or a HomePod Mini should work great. Now, it does help sometimes to reboot all of the network equipment that could be between your router and the Apple Home Hub. You have, as well as the Hubitat itself, the iPad or the iPhone that you're working with, network switches, routers, and mesh Wi-Fi too. Then give it 5 minutes and check to make sure that everything is connected before trying again. You've already heard me give you a couple of caveats to how this integration works, so you might be missing a few things as you go through and you check off the boxes in order to choose devices that come into Apple HomeKit from your hub. Most of your directly connected Zigbee and Z-Wave devices are gonna be available for control, but some of them will not. And the best example of this is garage door controllers and locks that you've brought into Hubitat. There will be other device types that many of you will have, so leave those down below so that other automators can know what you've run into. That way we help our whole community know what they might have to deal with. Regardless, we're gonna fix those in a few minutes. Hang on, I know I keep promising that, but this integration with HomeKit is still in beta as I make this video. So the situation will improve as we go, and I expect more compatibility to occur, not less. Now here's where things get really fun, because as you've added all of these sensors and devices into Apple HomeKit, you're given an opportunity to pick the names for not only the device, but the different components of the device that can be used by Apple HomeKit. Now, I was using incredibly cheap devices. In fact, I used this $20 Zigbee temperature and humidity sensor from Third Reality that I had paired with my Hubitat. HomeKit saw both the temperature and the humidity, and I can give each of those elements different names in the Home app. The same thing was true with the SmartThings multi-purpose sensor, which has temperature and its open and closed status. Plus, the water leak sensor from SmartThings had a water leak status and a temperature sensor. Then I thought there was nothing cheaper than an IKEA, and I introduced an IKEA Zigbee smart plug and a filament light bulb. Both of those came in as an IKEA outlet as the device type in Hubitat, which I'll explain caused me some issues, but for now, let's see what we can do. Right now, with just these few devices having come into Apple HomeKit, I can now control through the app, and because everything is happening locally in my home network, it is incredibly fast. The responses are instantaneous, and I'm even getting really fast responses from all of the sensors that I've added. All of the sensors are showing at the top of the different rooms because I've chosen in their settings to include them in home summaries under status. I also have the chance to create simple automations within Apple HomeKit if I would like. And with all of these cheap sensors now being available to me through this hub, I now have lots of options for automations that help in Apple HomeKit. So I thought I would try and use Apple HomeKit to turn on the light when motion was detected, and to turn on and off the lights and the outlet itself based on the status of my contact or multi-purpose sensor. Creating an automation is as simple as tapping through a couple of screens in the Home app and choosing the trigger device and what the condition is that you want to start the automation on. And then you choose the action devices and what you would like to have happen with those devices when our trigger occurs. Once those are set up, you can see how fast the automations are running. And again, it really helps to have the Home Hub here on the Apple HomeKit side. But here's the thing. You might have noticed that my IKEA filament bulb wasn't working quite right because it's just an on and off control that I have in the HomeKit app. Either way, you will run into a couple of situations with this integration that you might not be excited about, whether it's a device that couldn't come in or whether it's a problem with how HomeKit is interpreting the device. So let's talk about how we can improve the situation when these things happen. Everything in Hubitat that you pair directly with the hub comes in and uses one of the drivers. What you will notice in your devices list is that there is a type. When you are adding some of your devices, you can choose this type, but you can see that when I added this filament bulb from IKEA, it shows the type IKEA trad-free control outlet. Now a control outlet is just an on and off switch, so it wasn't giving me that brightness control. So what I did is I changed the device type in Hubitat to a generic Zigbee bulb. I searched for bulb because I knew that's the type of device I had, and I chose generic Zigbee bulb with the hope that because it is a Zigbee light bulb that I'm working with, and because IKEA is making fairly simple devices that don't have a lot of specialized controls, that I could just switch to that. Now the good news for me is that it totally worked out, and it might work out for you with other Zigbee and Z-Wave devices to pick a different device type. But the best thing to do is to look at Hubitat's documentation for their list of compatible devices. There, what you will find is the device name next to the device type that you should be picking with Hubitat. So if you're just not seeing some expected features out of your device when you get it over to HomeKit, look at this list, which I will leave a link to in the description below, in order to make sure you're using the right device type. And if you're struggling, I think you understand now that a little bit of experimentation might produce some great results. Now, fair warning. Picking the wrong type of device in Hubitat can have it stop working entirely. And you know what? You might have to repair the device to the hub or just change the type back to whatever was partially working before. But remember how I said my Casa and my Hue devices didn't come into Apple HomeKit from the Hubitat hub? And remember how I said that locks and garage door openers and some other device types weren't available to come into HomeKit? Well, the good news is I have a workaround for dealing with this, and I'm going to walk you through a fairly simple process for dealing with those kinds of devices. The way that it is easiest to deal with this is called a virtual device. A virtual device is just a pretend version of something like a smart switch or a smart dimming bulb or a smart whatever. In the software of your Hubitat hub or the software of Apple HomeKit, a virtual device acts like a regular one. You can control it with either system, and it looks like you're controlling a real device. The status updates as if you are, but because it's virtual, it's not attached to any real light bulb or plug or smart gadget. Now let's create one of these virtual devices in Hubitat, and then I'll show you how it becomes useful. To create a virtual device with Hubitat, we head into the Devices tab in their interface. In that tab, pretend like you're adding a new device, and you will notice this option for virtual on the side. You're gonna name the device, and you can put the same name in a couple of times, and then you will choose the device type. You will notice a lot of options here, but I wanna keep it simple for this first example, and then we will discuss all the different device types that you're seeing here. So I'm going to choose a virtual switch and create it. But to make this useful, let's bring it in to Apple HomeKit. Now to do that, I head into the apps in Hubitat and then check off the new virtual switch. Then in just moments, the device shows up in Apple HomeKit in the room where you put your Hubitat hub during initial accessory adding in the Home app. Now, I had chosen the office, so all of my virtual devices that I create in Hubitat show up in the office in the Home app. And if I want, I can move them later. But now I have something in Apple HomeKit I can turn on or off, and I can do the same in Hubitat. Of course, it's not doing anything, so let's make it useful. Earlier, I discussed how my TP-Link devices wouldn't come into Apple HomeKit natively. And then even when I did this integration, they wouldn't come in. This means that while I have this great TP-Link power bar in my Hubitat hub, I can't control it in Apple HomeKit. You'll have other devices in your home that couldn't come in, or you might have the reverse situation. Either way, a virtual device can help us to control it no matter what system we're in. We'll do this by mirroring our virtual device with the status of the actual device. Now, you could create a set of automations in Hubitat to mirror the action of a virtual switch with any device. It can be done, but in some cases, the device types you'll want to use will be a struggle if you try to do it with automations or the rule machine. But the good news is there's a much easier way to do this. If you head into the Apps tab inside of Hubitat, you can add a new app and then search for Mirror. Choose to install that on your hub, and then you can create a device mirror. This allows you to choose the virtual switch you just created and any device you would like to mirror the action. So if I want to get control of one of the outlets on my TP-Link power bar, I'm going to pick that and the HomeKit virtual switch that I just created. Now, anytime I control that switch in Apple HomeKit, it turns on my TP-Link power bar's printer plug. And here's a couple of interesting things about doing this though. Number one, the TP-Link service is pretty quick with how fast it responds, but not every service will instantly give you the feedback that it has changed. That's okay, because for the most part, you just want that control for your device, but understand that the status might take a little time to update in the Home app. Number two, you could add multiple devices to mirror at the same time. So you could use one virtual switch to control a group of things in your Hubitat hub. Number three, if you head to the Hubitat application and change the status of that printer plug on the TP-Link power bar, it won't mirror to the virtual switch in the Home app. It would be the same problem if you have any automations that change the status of this plug, or if you headed it to another app and changed the status of that plug, or you did it physically on the device. So what you do with this is you do the reverse mirror. And this seems to work just fine. And number four, if you did try to mirror 3 or 4 devices at the same time, you would have to create the mirrors with each of the devices you're controlling at the same time as the mirroring device. I know that's getting confusing, but here's an example with 3 devices. One thing you'll notice here is that the primary device in each of these 3 automations is one of the 3 devices, and then I'm mirroring it to the replica devices or the other 2 involved in the mirror. However, one thing I did find was that for any device that was connected to Hubitat through another service, like my TP-Link power bar, I had to set a poll interval, which means you're checking the status of that device every so often. Now, this can be heavy on system resources, but I check my TP-Link printer plug every 5 seconds, and after I did that and saved that as part of my device's status, then I did find that this mirror worked perfectly, but I would have sometimes a little bit of a delay when I changed the status of the TP-Link bar from another system. So it's not instantaneous with these ones, but it does work. So now we have our virtual switch controlling one or maybe multiple devices, and we have been able to establish control of things that we couldn't do before. This can happen in reverse, and if you think about Hubitat as a hub, one of the big things that they're missing is integration with camera systems. This has been a gap for a while, but Apple HomeKit has HomeKit Secure Video, and that's a great option from a security and privacy standpoint. So a great camera like the Aqara G3 camera hub can't normally be used with a system like Hubitat. However, we can create an automation in Apple HomeKit whenever the camera hub detects motion to send that to our Hubitat hub using a virtual switch. Obviously, you can't use the same virtual switch for multiple purposes like this. So I created a new one called Aqara Camera Motion in Hubitat, and I brought it over to HomeKit using the same method we did before. The automation I'm creating is just a simple one where if my G3 detects motion, then I will turn on this new virtual switch. I could put some conditions on this for people being around my home in the HomeKit app, or I could put conditions around this for time, or both. But then I will create a second automation that will turn off the virtual switch whenever the camera stops detecting motion. When I head over to Hubitat, they have a whole security system that today doesn't integrate with HomeKit, but I expect that will probably show up as a security system at some point in Apple's app. But it would be really great to include this new Aqara Camera Motion as a security device in the Hubitat Safety Monitor, which I can do. But with a basic virtual switch, you can't actually do this, so there's a little bit of a workaround. And what you're noticing here is, as I'm in the Hubitat Safety Monitor, I don't have a motion sensor, an open or a close sensor. I actually have a virtual switch. So I could use it as a light or a switch alert, but that doesn't help us to actually trigger the security system. So what we need to do is create another virtual device, but in this case, the virtual device is a virtual motion sensor. So you can see me choosing this one. It's called Aqara Pretend Motion, and it's a virtual motion sensor, and I'm placing it in the virtual devices room. Now I go into apps, and I'm going to create the first rule that helps us with this. I'm going to call this one virtual motion on, and my trigger device is going to be that virtual switch. So when that turns on, then I'm going to take some actions. Now I go into actions and I create a new action, but this has to be a custom action because we're actually going to change the status of a virtual motion sensor. So that's the Aqara Pretend virtual motion sensor that we just created. When that switch goes on, I'm changing the motion to active, and so now I have it coming from HomeKit directly into that. So here's my first automation, and I create a second automation that is the reverse. You can see this one turns off or sends the Aqara Pretend motion to inactive when that motion turns off in HomeKit. Now I can go into my Hubitat Safety Monitor and I can choose that as a motion sensor to use within whichever segments I would like in the Hubitat Safety Monitor. So I'm choosing to put it in the away and the night statuses in order to send me alerts. So now what I have is a motion detecting camera in HomeKit under HomeKit Secure Video coming over to my Hubitat hub for the purposes of security. I could also use that virtual switch in all kinds of automations. So I'll leave you to do that for your own home. But keep in mind that you can take just about anything from HomeKit and pass it to Hubitat this way. A great example is with the geofencing that's done with Apple products. So if anyone returns home, you can send that to a virtual switch to Hubitat for use there. A lot of the smart home products we use have dimmer control or brightness control. They could be things like bulbs, or they could be curtains or blinds where we have percentage-based control of how open or on those devices are. As I said before, there are a lot of different virtual devices that you can use, and they will be more suited to your specific situation depending on what you're trying to do. But here's the list of virtual device types that worked and showed up in Apple HomeKit for control. But for most of your other smart home products, a virtual dimmer is going to do everything you need. That gives you control from 0 to 100, and when you create a virtual dimmer in Hubitat, you get a slider control in HomeKit. For the purposes of this demonstration, I created a virtual dimmer called HomeKit Filament Controller with type virtual dimmer. So in this example, I'm going to try and mirror the brightness of my IKEA filament bulb with that virtual dimmer. It's almost the same process as before, as I can create a new device mirror and choose the virtual dimmer called HomeKit Filament Controller, and then choose my filament bulb from IKEA. Again, the control is almost instantaneous, but I had to deal with the reverse situation, and when I tried to just use that mirror, things went a little awry. What I had to do here was to create a couple of other automations, and I had to put in a little bit of a delay. So I'm showing you the automation I created to do the reverse and allow this, the actual filament bulb, if I was controlling that from anywhere else in my home, to update this virtual dimmer in the Apple Home app. But I gave it a delay of 2 seconds because otherwise it was too fast. So that local control was actually causing the two devices to just instantly update each other, and so the bulb wouldn't actually move, or at least not very far. But I want to go back to those mirrors for a second. I think what you should be seeing as I created these mirrors is that many different device types will forward different types of statuses or status updates. You can see here in mirroring the dimmers that it says level, level change, and even switch events will be forwarded. If you have an incompatible replica device, it will only take some of those mirror features, so keep that in mind as you build these out. This is obviously going to give you the option to control all of this with your HomePod Mini and through Apple Siri on your phones or your iPads. I don't need to tell you much about how that's going to work because it's a voice assistant, but understand that the names you use in Apple HomeKit will really affect how successful you're going to be with voice control. All of those sensors that I added are better accessed by asking Siri what the temperature is in a room than it is to try to say that big name that I gave it. So even think about the names of your sensors. Hey, turn on IKEA filament in Hubitat.
Okay. The IKEA filament in Hubitat is on.
Hey, turn on HomeKit Filament Controller.
Okay, the HomeKit filament controller is on.
Hey, change HomeKit Filament Controller to 50%.
Okay, I set the HomeKit filament controller to 50%.
Asking those virtual switches to turn on and off or to change the dimming level on those is going to go better, again, if I change the name in HomeKit to something much simpler. Turn off Easy Light.
Okay, the Easy Light is off.
Turn on Easy Light.
Okay, the Easy Light is on.
Easy Light to 10%.
Okay, I set the Easy Light to 10%.
Now with these two systems being combined, you have a lot of power, but most people are using a very small amount of that power in their homes. The fact is that most people don't understand how to build really effective automations. These kinds of tools can be overwhelming, and just understanding some of the basics of automation will really help you to take those automations and improve them in your home so that you can automate your life.
He said it! He said it!
Now I created this guide that's up on screen now. Click or tap there to learn how to create much better automations in your home in an easy and effective way, no matter which smart home hub or system you use. Otherwise, thanks for watching today, and of course, don't hate, automate.